And with that, I can welcome Andreas. Lovely to see you.
Hello, good to see you.
I'm going to steal Jazel's thunder for a moment, Andreas, because I read the most wonderful quote um, that former UK Secretary of State Michael Gove referred to you once as the most important person in English education. Do you remember that moment?
Yes,
And then it says, despite being German. You may have noticed we have a German England manager now. How do you feel about that?
very good. Yes,
Happy?
yes, that's good.
That's a major step forward for our country, I think. So a huge welcome. How do we find you today?
Very well. Thanks so much for welcoming me, and thanks for the opportunity.
We
Looking
are
forward to this.
hugely honored, and I was slightly relieved because you are such a big figure in education. In doing my research and watching your videos, you're actually very friendly, aren't you?
I hope so.
So that's always a relief. We have one or two people over these years who have been very, very serious, and it slightly catches me off guard. We're going to dive in. We've got just under an hour with you now and an audience here, and I very much would love some participation today. So we'll talk for a little bit, and then I would love to open up the stage here and have some more cameras and some insights to share with Andreas or some questions. We're obviously talking about policy today and reform to some extent, really tapping into the global view on education and some of the differences. I think some of your work covers upwards of 90 countries, Andreas, if I'm correct. But let's start at the beginning. And Jaisal, I'll do a little bit of room setting once you've finished, but perhaps you would very kindly introduce Andreas for us.
Absolutely. It would be a pleasure. And I think having an Indian accent, I apologize beforehand if the surname is pronounced a little differently, Andreas. So, Andreas Schleicher, Director for Education and Skills at the OECD. Andreas is a key figure in shaping global education policy through data-driven insights. His work has transformed how governments approach education standards, focusing on workforce preparedness, and ensuring equitable access to quality education. Andreas is instrumental in driving the global conversation on using AI generated data to create more effective education policies. And I would add something more to this is Andreas is known by reputation as one of the most wise and well-regarded observers of where education is going. And I would
And
be
then the
introducing
dreaded point where Jaisal does my intro, which is so embarrassing. And Richard tries hard.
For the
Thank you.
kind
So,
introduction.
Richard, I have to introduce you. I think so many new people join and want to know about you. So it's always good to have an intro. So, Richard Foster-Fletcher, chair of MKAI.org. Richard is a global authority on AI ethics. He helps organizations navigate the complexities of AI to ensure its responsible and sustainable implementation. His work focuses on aligning AI with ethical practices, particularly within education, ensuring that technological progress does not come at the expense of human values. Thank you, Richard, for your patience.
Yeah, and that's going great, isn't it, so far? We're really getting those human values in, aren't we? We're doing a great job in
Yes,
the world.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, not the real Richard. Yeah, some people do know the real Richard, of course, but I hope it's consistent. Anyway, we don't come here to necessarily be right. We're honored to be in the presence of Andreas, who's obviously reflecting, thinking, and to some extent is prepared to spend some time with us today, but very much to have an open mind about the world and it is changing. So please do mention where you're from in the chat, and if you want to share a website or a URL that represents you, it'd be lovely for other people to correct. Andreas, I mean, I suspect most people know about the OECD and they can envision your role a little bit, but perhaps in your own words, could you talk about some of the framing the work that you do a little bit so we can have that in mind as we have this conversation?
Yeah, what we've been working on is to make education not less of an art, but a little bit more like a science, to sort of get data that help us understand where things are going well, where we are lagging behind, what the outcomes of education are for people, for countries, for economies. So making education measurable and, feeding better data into, hopefully better policies and practices. That's really our mission and seeing education not just as an end in itself, but also how it's connected, to societies. We can see, for example, in our countries today, the kind of polarization that we have in skills, big differences translate into economic polarization, some having great jobs and others less great jobs, and then that translates into social polarization, sometimes political polarization. So creating strong foundations really for people to access and participate in our societies. That's our mission really at the OECD.
And let's jump to the crux of the conversation and then find our way back to that, if that's okay. And you do take a strong interest, as expected, in artificial intelligence, which, given your background and given the interest that you have in data, of course, is no surprise. But I'm curious personally, was there a moment where you really changed your consideration about the importance of artificial intelligence in education, or has it been much more of a gradual process for you?
Well, for me, that personal moment actually was in 2018. I was in a classroom in Shanghai, and I watched primary grade students learn calligraphy, and that's one of the biggest headaches of Chinese teachers. We struggle with 30 characters and they have to learn 4,000. So it's just a massive amount of work. And they don't consider it just a method or technique, it's an art for them. So I could see those students drawing the characters with a pen and ink on their tables, and inside their tables they had integrated scanners, and on that table they had their mobile phone giving them real-time feedback on the quality of their work. Now they didn't have to wait 3 days until the teacher had marked their work. The teacher didn't have to have walked through piles and piles of student work. It was all done in real time. The teacher could see how different students think differently, work differently, where they get interested, where they get bored, where they advance, where they get stuck. It was a totally different kind of learning environment. And that was in 2018. We had started to work on artificial intelligence first in 2016, but a couple of years later, you could see really how it was transforming learning experiences. But for me, that was the eye opener. And then, once you are sensitive to that, you can see all sorts of really interesting things. That's the sort of AI clearly has transformed how we learn, but it's also transforming what we learn. Now, what is very clear today is that the kind of things that are easy to teach have become easy to digitize. The AI wipes out all of those kinds of routine skills. It really pushes us much harder to think what makes us human. Now, how do we educate first-class humans rather than, just second-class robots who are just good at repeating what we told them? So I think it challenges AI, challenges, how we learn. And that's really where this 2018 experience, really transformed me. And it challenges what we should be learning, how we should be, getting people ready for this new age now.
That's fascinating. And I think a lot of people here will resonate that they also had a moment, whether it's education or some other aspect. My background was in technology. I spent many years at Oracle. And I mean, my moment was working with one of our clients who were doing the referencing for the recruitment project, big clients. And it really just dawned on me that so much of the problems that we have is the pauses between actual improvements happening. So in their case, somebody would send a reference into an email and it would sit in the inbox for minutes, hours, or days. And somebody looks at it, and if it isn't correct, the document's not exactly, it goes back, sits in their inbox. And you've just got hours and hours of days of wasting. And then we put a technology in that uses optical character recognition, scans the document, and deals with it in seconds. And I think relating that to our conversation, you think about any classroom around the world, some people are ahead, some people are struggling to understand the task, some people are, but there's one teacher and people are just sitting there waiting for the next thing or clarification or, like you say, to understand how well they're doing. And the list goes on. And you clock up all those minutes and hours across all the students across the world, and you see that wasted time. That automation AI, if nothing else, just closes those gaps on the times when no improvements of productivity is happening, whether it's business or education. When you speak to leaders around the world, are they still very concentrated on the plagiarism conversation? And how do you sort of honor that without necessarily getting stuck on it?
Yeah, I think, in one way, we need to have, rethink the concept of plagiarism. Now, in a way, I think that was crafted in a world where information was static. You write something in your life and then you own it for your life. Today, what you know today, tomorrow is a commodity for everyone else. And in a sense, I think we have to rethink those kinds of concepts. The nature of information is evolving with AI. Now, in a way, what's your own, what's AI? I think it's going to get harder to make that distinction and that question of ownership and plagiarism. In a way, when you get into a university, you have students writing their work with AI and professors correcting that work with AI, and then you have to ask yourself, what is our contribution to this? But I think that is a really interesting conversation. It's not about AI versus humans. It's how we, work with humans. You rightly say, as the role of teachers is transformed. In the past, the teacher was an instructor. They tell you something. Today, that is so much done, but more effectively done by AI. But as a teacher, you have an even more interesting, even more important role. You need to be a good coach. You need to be a good mentor, a good facilitator, a good, social worker, a very creative designer of innovative learning environments. So in a way, I think the opportunities AI creates to make our work a lot more interesting, I think, are also very, very important.
There's so much I want to ask you. In the UK, I mean, we're predominantly UK focused at the moment. We make this very clear in the work and our reports and so on that there is absolutely no sense that we are talking about AI replacing teachers. But with your global perspective, is there any sense that that's not true?
I agree. Education is always a social or relational experience. It's not a transactional business. So I don't think AI is going to replace teachers. But what I do believe is that teachers who are good at using AI will well replace teachers who struggle with that transition. I actually think in the future, if you're not really, really good in using AI, both the analytics that it provides, the learning environments, students will just not listen to you. Now, why would you as a student listen to your teacher talking about the results of a scientific experiment when you can do that experiment in a virtual laboratory yourself, learn from it, learn with it? So I do believe, teachers who struggle with the, digital transition are going to have a very, very hard time. That's why, the job, the role of teachers will remain. And I think actually it's going to become even more important than it is today. But, I would really think, teachers who are not ready for that, they will face difficulties simply because, one of the things you can see, you are interested in the UK, why are so many young people dropping out of school or not finishing school or just not showing up? That is a phenomenon that didn't exist to this extent, 5 years, 6 years ago. And the answer is not because they don't have money or because there's no teacher. The answer is simply they get bored. That is no longer relevant and interesting to them. So I think, as a teacher, if you want to, make your own work interesting and keep your job, you have to do a lot of things differently now.
I'm 42 years old, so I'm approaching 20 years now of doing these sorts of things. And there is definitely an absence of creative, free-thinking people in business, for sure. Now, okay, a lot of them start their own companies, so maybe you don't meet them in the same way. But I take your point entirely. There's some that are struggling, some that are falling away from the system, some that succeed in the system, and there's some that are brilliantly creative that the system simply doesn't serve. And okay, I've got my UK lens on there a little bit. Coming back to a point you make as well about using AI to create the content, using AI to mark the content. I mean, we already see that I mentioned recruitment earlier on, but we have so many situations where individuals are writing applications for jobs using AI and companies are reading those applications using AI. And that's just almost surreal, isn't it, Andreas, that there's no humans in that loop anymore to some extent.
Yeah, I think that, but the kind of processes that lend themselves to AI are ones that we shouldn't worry about. I actually think we should think harder about what makes us human. How do we add value to this experience and focus our efforts on this? And if the matching of people to companies is facilitated better through AI, then could be a good thing. But I do think, as a human resource manager, you still have a really, really important job in, finding talent, allocating it and so on. So I think you can be supported by AI. You should be. But, there's always the question, is AI going to destroy more jobs than it creates or create more jobs than it destroys? And, at least throughout history, we can see that, technology has always generated more opportunity than it took away from people. Now, this time may be different. Nobody knows. But I do think, we should approach it with that intention to give humans a better and more interesting role, enabled through AI. But, again, taking the role of education of a teacher, it can go either way. AI can super empower you as a teacher. It can, help you understand how different students learn differently and how you can, understand their motivations, their interests, and all of that. It can make you aware of, your own biases, perhaps. AI could be a superpower for you. But it can also make your teaching more scripted, more, algorithmic, and that's the other risk, that we deploy AI without reflecting on it. And that's true in many areas of life. We have often traded in our freedom, our creativity for convenience, and that can happen for teachers as well, just using scripted lessons plans rather than thinking for myself. So where we end up is not that clear, but I think the opportunities are ones that we should clearly learn to harvest.
Yeah, I mean, if I was being slightly harsh, and I say I'm not in the profession, but working with it, is if these tools are being used around the world to create a formalized structure to lesson plans, and let's call a spade a spade. A lot of what comes out of AI is mediocre.
Mm,
I'll put a sidebar in there that I think it depends when you start using something like ChatGPT in your life. I
mhm,
was 40, with the greatest of respect. I sort of found my voice already. I knew what good looked like. I knew what a world-class presentation proposal doesn't mean I can always do, but I know what it looks like. And if you grab this tool at say 20, do you actually know what the goal is from the beginning? How do you know when the AI has got you there if you
mm,
haven't already developed those skills?
mm.
But if that is the case, and mediocrity becomes prevalent across education because of the convenience of using AI, then you set yourself up to be replaced with respect far more than if you harness these tools to show that you're irreplaceable as a sector.
Yeah, but that has always been the case. I think the biggest risk for humans is not that computers become as good as we as humans, but that we as humans degrade our capabilities to become more like computers.
Yes,
You know,
sir.
if you do a routine kind of job, yeah, one day a robot is going to walk into the door and say, I can do that better. And but the answer to that is simply, concentrate on what makes us as human, at least for now. It's our consciousness, it's our, ability to distinguish between right and wrong, it's our ability to navigate ambiguity, manage uncertainty, all of those kinds of things. It's the social quality that we bring. And, I do think, when you ask me, what does it all mean for education? In the past, it was all about knowledge and academic content. We learned answers in school. No? Today, it's about asking the right questions. It's about, being able to live with yourself, to live with people who are different from you, to live with this planet, to make, good choices and trade-offs between the present and the future. So I think those are the questions. If we do not find answers to them, I think the risk is that, and you could say the same about, older technologies. Think about television. Television can be a great inspiration. You can learn a lot of things, or it can be a tool of consumption where you just sit and, absorb passive knowledge. And I don't think AI is any different. It's just an incredible amplifier, a massive accelerator. And, it is ethically neutral. I think that is something, AI can say of itself, but it's always in the hands of people who are not neutral. And, that's, I think, where we need to work on now.
Yeah, people like to say that, don't they? They like to compare artificial intelligence to fire or an axe or something, and
Mm.
chop wood or kill somebody. But that's not the case. It's always in the hands of somebody. There's always an intent behind this,
Yeah.
and I think that gets lost. Um, I'm conscious that I might be trying to lead the conversation rather than really explore. And I think that's because I have these burning concerns, perhaps. But I will try and also be aware of that in this conversation and not dominate with these particular thoughts. But I'll risk one more in that. You're sort of describing a lot of what I've seen, in the past, which is, I mean, just the UK alone, but this is true of almost, probably half the countries in the world. Millions of people, first of all, I would consider have been institutionalized by schooling, education, university, and the workplace, are showing up to work every day, And that's about it. They are showing up, they're getting through the day, they're putting up with it, they're working in administrative roles. They're not innovating, they're not innovative, and it could be it's not, a slight against people, but it is the fact of what we see in business. That is such a ripe market for AI companies, a massive market of people who sort of don't want to be there in the first place and don't care.
Mhm.
That's a lot of people, and it really concerns me. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I think, we should start, your reflections are spot on. We measured recently creativity among 10-year-olds and 15-year-olds. And in almost every jurisdiction, we found that 15-year-olds were less creative than 10-year-olds.
Mm,
You start to think through that. If I would tell you, your 15-year-olds are doing worse in mathematics than your 10-year-olds, you would say, oh, wow, this can't be, school is impossible. School is always teaching us something. But, in some of the skills most important today, school may take things away from you. When you are born, you have that abundance of creativity, and then you get into school. The school tries to make you compliant with established ways of thinking, established ways of walking, and actually, may take some of that away, what you will actually need in today's world, in the AI world, to be imaginative. Now, but that's, I think, the institutionalized framework, the risks among them. But on the other hand, AI now can give you true ownership over what you learn and how you learn and where you learn and even when in your life you learn. And so I think if we can rebalance those, to use technology as a tool that truly empowers, learners and educators and creates a different relationship between them. All of that transactional stuff can now be done through technology, so that teachers can focus much more on the relational, on the social aspects. They are trying to understand, who you are as a student. Who do you want to become? How can I accompany you on that journey? Then rather thinking, how do I teach you trigonometry or fractions? So anyway, I think that if AI helps us on that transition, it will accomplish a lot. And absolutely, there's a huge market for that now.
that is, I mean, you've summarized it beautifully, of course, and those skills, the curiosity, the problem solving, they are coming into their own as this tool. I mean, is it the greatest tool that we've ever had? Okay, we'll see what comes next. Helping, one to navigate the world's knowledge, and those people that are sort of having an AI first mindset in what they're doing are extending their value, hugely across the task they're doing. I mean, that's a hell of a gap, isn't it, that it creates from those who either just see it as as a digital skill, perhaps,
Mm.
or those who haven't grasped it. And one thing that catches me out on that is I don't think it's even fear or uncertainty. I think a lot of the case it's lethargy, and I've mentioned this because it's just like,
Mm.
oh, I tried it and I couldn't see the point. And other people are just falling over backwards, going, I'm completely running my business from this now.
Mm. Mm.
But yeah, and that's down to the way you look at it, isn't it? More so than
Mm.
anything else. What you described though, about, if I think, think back to how you just described beautifully what is needed, I think, from education. Which government embodies that? Is there one so far that gets it and would articulate it as beautifully as you just did?
I think there are lots of teachers who are doing a really great job on this and who are embracing this new technological revolution. Now, some schools are very good at that. And there are some education systems, if you look in Europe, a country like Estonia, education has become a laboratory for lots of really interesting approaches. Lots of entrepreneurs are working in the field of education. Lots of teachers have become entrepreneurs. No? At the other end of the world, I mentioned Shanghai in China, another incredible laboratory for AI technologies with an army of teachers who are not just instructors in the classroom, but they actually spend a good share of their time researching new technologies and how they could transform learning. They work with their colleagues in professional learning communities. They publish, new ideas, new projects. They have digital platforms to share their lesson plans and projects and so on. So yeah, I think, some systems are clearly much, much further on that journey. They reconfigure time, space, people, relationships, all of those things that often are very, very static in a school environment. Learning is never a place. It's always an activity. And if you can actually, help people, understand their dreams, in a way. And then it's not, technology is the tool, it's not the goal here. But if technology can help you find out, why you are here on this planet, what is important to you, what things do you really love to do in your life, if and education can help you understand what your talents are, where you are really good at, how you can become good at in what is important to you. If it can help you understand, what the world needs from you, where you can make a difference to other people, to the world, then I think technology can super empower education.
I love that so much. And we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, of course, and I think you probably want to put AI for health, climate, and access to finance, maybe slightly lower on that pyramid. But what you just said, I mean, it is the opportunity, isn't it? How do we help more people transform their talent
Mm,
into a tangible life where that's realized? And
mm,
so few of us ever really get to do that.
mm. Yeah, what worries me, and we just collected data from, hundreds, thousands of adults and asked them about, their propensity to learn throughout life. And the answer is that, a good majority of older people in the UK say, no, thank you. I was in school. I had all of that. I got my degree. I'm not going to do any more of that. We have associated learning with, very passive, consumptive, a degree-oriented activity, and people are not, seeing that as a pathway to the future. They say, I've completed my education. I don't have, a new starting point for my life. And if you can't change that attitude, build that agency, that, ownership of people, then for learning, I think in a time where things change very quickly, where you have to reimagine, reinvent yourself every day, you're going to have a very hard time now.
And a second part to my question about governments, are there governments emerging or already active where they're putting proper money into artificial intelligence and the education sector?
Well, I think that's still, I think there's still a huge imbalance in this. Education is still a very people-intensive industry, and to some extent for good reason, but clearly I don't see how we do justice to the possibilities that we have. In a way, you can see this even with the physical infrastructure of schools. We have, we pay a lot of people in education. There's a lot of money going into education also per student. But, any shopping center looks better than a school. That's where it starts. The signal that we send to young people, about the place. And the same is with the technology. Probably the computer that you see in school or the tablet is probably pretty outdated compared to what you would use at home. And I think that is the kind of wrong signal we send to young people. School used to be the place, it would, if you look, 100 years ago, school was the first place you would see a book. It was the most advanced place on the kind of knowledge frontier. And today it's often, the last place. People tell you shut everything off when you go into school. You have to switch off your mobile phone and anything. In a way, it has become a place where actually the past is conserved. But the young people do not see that this is where, they build their future.
Yeah, a friend of mine visited from Europe and genuinely confused one of our schools in Milton Keynes for a prison. Genuinely thought it was a prison. Ah, but the concern there, I guess you're alluding to, is there are some huge gaps, obviously massive gaps in education systems around the world, um, and AI can, is in danger of either leveling those or accelerating those, isn't it?
Well, I think there are two sides to this. On the one hand, AI provides the very first opportunity for humanity to give everyone an excellent education.
Mm.
I'm not saying just rich and poor, but think about, students with special needs. If you have dyslexia or, other special needs, today with AI, you can be, participating in every education kind of opportunity. Education, AI can actually adapt learning to your needs rather than squeezing you into some kind of template. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I also would say, in areas where, teacher supply is an issue, surely AI can compensate for some of the functions that are absent in not all of the teachers, but surely on the knowledge transmission. So I actually think AI really is that unique opportunity that we have. Education always used to be a scarce good.
Mm,
We made it scarce. We
mm,
only let some people participate.
yes.
And that probably was the dumbest decision humanity ever did. We constrained the opportunity of people. Now technology can help us this, but there's no automaticity in this. During the pandemic, we have seen how AI technology can massively amplify
Mm,
educational inequality.
mm.
Super empower those who have the right skills and disempower those who don't use it well, or even who don't have access to physical access to technology. So I think again, this is where public policy comes in, to harness the kind of opportunities, the equity enhancing opportunities, and at the same time, ensure that uh, access to good technology and the good use of technology is equal. And I don't think that's so difficult to achieve. People who tell me it's impossible, I say, well, how do you get a great teacher into the last corner of the world? That's a much, much larger challenge. Distributing human capital, human talent equally across the world. That is, a formidable challenge. But technology, it is actually a lot easier if we just were committed to that.
Yeah, I'd love to dive in there, but Alex has just appeared in my life. Do
Good afternoon.
you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Alex Monahan. I work at the OU now. I've been working in AI for 40 years or so since AI was a fairly rare beast, um, and looking very closely for the OU at the use of AI in education. And this is higher education sector. They're a bit more concerned about assessment and awarding degrees to robots than they are about actually helping people to use AI to improve themselves. But I'm hoping that will change.
Yeah, I mean, university is often the sector that has the hardest time with this, because it's a very monopolistic industry. It has tried to monopolize content that didn't work very well. Content is now available everywhere. It tried to monopolize delivery, instruction that hasn't worked very well. Now you can actually have, open source environments for learning and so on. What it still does very well is monopolize degrees. And that is really the bottleneck. The moment actually someone cracks that nut, when micro credentials really become a currency, when you can actually, think about blockchain technologies combined with AI, where you can actually, create your own record of, what you can do in real time. That's the moment when I think we're going to see those monopolies break down. And I'm sure there's always going to be a future for universities because there's always going to be people who want to become researchers. But there will be lots of other opportunities for people who choose another pathway. And that's something I think we're at the moment we're penalizing them. Actually, I think the UK is a good example. If you go to university, you get lots of subsidies, indirect and direct. You get this government grants for tuition, everything. If you choose another pathway of education, good luck. Actually, you have to do a lot to actually, create your own opportunities and in a non-university advanced skill level.
Anything else, Alex?
No, I mean I've put a few things in the chat about the ethics of this and the fact that it is about finance, but Andreas summed that up very well. I think it's quite interesting. We're sitting here in the UK. I'm sure we've got people from other places that I can't see on my screen, but I think the UK is really stuck in this, whereas some countries are able to be a lot more flexible and react a lot more quickly. And places like China can throw money at this in a big way that the UK is never going to do. So I think it's a real risk for the developed world that the emerging world and places like China calls itself the first world will catch up and overtake us simply because they're quicker at it.
Yeah, so I want to go to Jason in a second because there's been quite a few questions in the chat. So if Jason, you can get two or three ready for us, we've got about 21 minutes on the clock. But I spoke to Ted Fujimoto, which might be a name that you've heard before in the past, Andreas, on the last episode of this, and asked him this same similar question, really, in the scenario that Andreas, you and I could work together and we can go and get some funding from the World Bank or Bill and Melinda Gates or something like that. And we could take over a blockchain-enabled, open source, micro-credential learning platform to anywhere. And let's say we took it to Burkina Faso. That is a great opportunity. And in doing so, of course, we had the best of intentions and we'd worked really hard on this. And we'd used, the greatest large language models and the data to put this out there, and we'd focused on the use of data on this and connectivity and power and tried to overcome all of those massive challenges. At the end of it, we've still probably got something that's as potentially as damaging as it is helpful because of the way this has been created with a Western eye. So a Burkina Faso micro-credential open platform of learning sort of needs to come from there somehow, doesn't it? Otherwise, the risks are too high, possibly. Can you help me kind of unpack that a little bit?
I agree. I think, AI should be in the channel. But I think, it is always relying on the training data. Now, that is very, very clear. And I think we want to make that training data as, context adapted as it can be. I would still say, I think Burkina Faso would have a great start with a system like that. I think it would enable a lot of people to see the world differently. And then, probably become also, good contributors to expanding training data. I'm always, hopeful that AI will expand its own capacities. There is more people actively engaged with it. I think as long as Burkina Faso is shut out of those kinds of systems, the training data will become even more biased. So I would actually think the more people actively engage with those kinds of technologies, the more likely their voice is in some ways reflected in that. So I think, and I hear that argument often, we shouldn't, deploy those kinds of technologies because they have their own biases. I would say this about every classroom teacher. As a classroom teacher, you have your own, biases about your students, and you have a limited view of the world and a limited experience with those students. That's the reality. So I think the best you can do is, broaden your perspective, broaden your views. And I would think, we should build AI systems that are very good at learning and expanding and think beyond that training data. And actually, some of those technologies are quite capable of doing that. The other part, that is very important in this, and I come back to this example I mentioned from China. What they do really well is that the teachers themselves are not consumers of those technologies, but they're very much involved in the design of them. They've spent a good part of their work, building the underpinnings from this, doing the underlying research. And I think that is one of the best. If you would have the teachers in Burkina Faso, starting to use AI-based technologies to co-create new lesson plans, to share them, to develop them, probably you'd see a much richer resource of learning than you currently do. So yeah, I think, we shouldn't use that as an excuse not to make those technologies available.
So two quick questions. Sorry, Jose, I know I promised to, but one, is that happening anywhere that you see? Are there startups or foundations that are not?
I mean, you
but
can
generally.
if you look to Africa, I've been very impressed by a country like Rwanda. It's a small country, but one that is really on its feet. That it's building a high-tech medical sector. They are the first vaccine developer in the region. And I think those are things that, yes, it's still borrowing on technology from other countries, but most countries have started their journey by borrowing on what exists, and then they have added to that. And I'm actually confident that people can do that.
And the second part of that is, let's just change the country focus and let's pick Georgia for obvious reasons that will become apparent. So we could try and take that solution to Burkina Faso. We could take those solutions to Georgia, but let's focus on Georgia. To what extent will we just try and unleash that into a country in a sort of decentralized approach? Or, would you need a government like the Georgian one to approve something like that, which one perceives they wouldn't at this point in history?
Yeah, that's always a good question. I actually think it's going to be increasingly harder for the kind of vertical mechanisms that we have in education to prevail. Education will inevitably to become more horizontal. In the past, the way education worked is, you had someone at the top who thinks, this is what millions of learners should learn. Then, you write a curriculum or you contract the writing of a school curriculum. Then you train an army of teachers to deliver it. In the end, that's what students learn. That kind of pipeline just no longer works. You talk about 20 years. That's why what we learn in school is so outdated, because that kind of vertical, hierarchical kind of system is no longer, fit for the time in which we live. What we need is lateral structures, people who work, collaborate, co-create together. And that is exactly where AI come in. So I actually think AI can help the transition from a system in verticals to a system that is much more collaborative, much more engaging for the profession, that empowers professionals by being not atomistic in one classroom, but by being part of a really strong, technology-enabled profession. So, yeah, maybe that some countries may not want to introduce it, but I almost think, if you stick to the hierarchical, vertical mechanisms of education, you're going to educate people for our past, not for their future.
Thank you. Jaisal, what's been happening
Thank you,
in the
Richard.
chats?
Absolutely, it has many questions and comments, but I'll go with the questions because of the time. So there's one question from Atif Ahmed, and I think because we have talked about vertical to lateral, this is quite relevant. How far do you see the effectiveness and value of investing in research and development in developing countries to advance the educational practices that utilize AI?
I think that is incredibly important. In a way, I think if you compare education with the medical sector, in the medical sector, any doctor will conduct clinical trials. They'll always be engaged in, enhancing the efficacy of their practice. They're always at the frontier. And the research, I can only talk about OECD countries, but they spend, 17 times as much on medical research than on education research and innovation. And that tells you a story. We consider education still largely an art, an industry, not a knowledge kind of, sector. And I think, and as an emerging country, developing country, you need to reimagine the frontiers. You need to, make this an industry that is transformed by knowledge about the efficacy of this practice. And you need to get every person working in that industry, every teacher involved in that knowledge creation. And that, I think, is something that is incredibly important.
You so much. There's another question that we can go for. I think we have talked about a little bit on personalized learning, but I think if we can go in a little bit of depth, Ajmer Alamwani has asked, how can AI-driven innovations transform traditional education systems to foster personalized learning, enhance accessibility, and better prepare students for the rapidly evolving job market of the future?
AI can do that in many things. The first, approach to personalization is that, while you learn on an AI-enabled system, the system will understand very quickly how you learn, where you advance, where you get stuck, what gets you interested, what gets you bored. And therefore, it can tailor content to your level. It can tailor the nature of the learning environment to your interest. And I think that's very, very important part of the personalization journey. But equally important, technology, AI can strengthen your own agency. You can do things. In a classroom, you're often, sitting and listening to what other people tell you. And in an AI-enabled environment, you can learn by doing. You can actually experiment with things, with ideas. You can make mistakes, learn from mistakes. Why do kids love computer games and hate school? It's actually the learning experience or the learning content is not so different. Actually, it's both about learning, but in one case, you get that immediate feedback. You get, you learn about yourself. This is where I'm good. This is where I need to become better. In the other case, you wait for a year to get your school mark. So I think that's the second part of personalization, that individual empowerment. And the third part of personalization is that teachers just get a much better sense of how different students learn differently. And I think that's also very, very important that teachers understand better who their students are and who they want to become.
Thanks, Andreas. I think in connection to your conversation with Richard and the past question, there's one from Peter Scott. And where should we look for leadership in this domain? Governments and ministries and regional school authorities seem too slow and bureaucratic to adapt to the pace of AI. Who will solve these problems for schools?
That's a really interesting question. I would start with the people that we often think of last, and that's the learners themselves. I do think actually we should trust learners more in figuring out, how they learn best and what kind of environment works best. If you think about a school exam, today there's someone at the top who thinks, oh, well, we'd give everybody a written test and they have to answer all the same question. In the future, probably, you ask people, you like to do written tests? Okay, go for it. We will test you with this. You like to do an interview? Okay, we will do an AI-enabled interview. You like to do a project? Go for it. Do that project. Try to demonstrate your skills. And at the end, AI can patch all of that together. So it's another kind of example how we can actually use technologies to genuinely empower people rather than, making them the slaves of scripted environments. And so I think that there's a lot of really good possibility.
Thank you, Andreas. And there's one question that had come in is from Shrikant Gededa. What novel educational approaches do you foresee emerging that will effectively harness AI capabilities to transform teaching and learning experiences? And then I have a few comments from the chat which I'll go through.
I thought, I gave a number of examples already. It's really learning environments that, empower students, where they take ownership over the content they learn, where they take greater ownership over the mode in which they learn, the timing in which they learn best. Now, when in my life do I want to learn? I think that's probably, where AI really transforms learning experiences. Then, that appraisal and feedback, I would say, one of the greatest mistakes we have made in the history of education was to divorce learning from examination. If you go back far enough in time, learning and examination was always two sides of the same coin. We all learned through apprenticeship. All animals learn through apprenticeship. We learned with people, from people. When you made a mistake, someone would tap you on your shoulder and say, hey, correct that. This is how you do things better. And then we started to divorce it. We said to young people, okay, pile up 10 years, 12 years of schooling. And then, one day we call you back and ask you, tell me everything that you learned in all your life in a very contrived, constrained setting. We call that an exam. But that is what has made learning so shallow. But that is what made teaching so shallow. So once again, what technology can do is reintegrate that learning and assessment to make them, again, two sides of the same coin. And I think that's hugely transformative in, encouraging a more authentic learning, encouraging a more problem-based, project-based teaching. So I actually think this is a huge opportunity.
Thanks, Andreas. There's one more question that I would ask, and it's with respect to what Alex has said. There's also a question of the purpose of assessment. Why does cheating matter? Because we talked about cheating in education and the tools that are getting used. We all use Google and other tools to get information we don't have in our heads. Is that cheating? Why is it okay in work but not okay in education? I think it's quite a lot people would want to hear this.
Well, my view on that is very clear. I think we should allow people to use whatever tools they have at their hands. And I don't actually think, it will necessarily make such a difference. If you cannot think like a mathematician and have a real mathematical problem to solve, Google is not going to help you a lot. If you understand the nature of a mathematical problem, but you do not remember the formula, well, then Google is great. Why not use it? We do not want to test whether students remember a formula. We want to test whether they can, understand the idea. Now, I give you an example. We teach students often to calculate an exponential function. Now, something that is very hard to learn and actually quite meaningless because, Google or your smartphone does all of that much better. We spend far too little effort in helping people understand the idea, the concept of an exponential function. Now, as humans, that's very hard for us. As humans, we are born into a linear world. Time is linear, space is linear. That's the world in which we are comfortable. And then we have a pandemic that evolves in, exponentials, and we don't understand it. Or we have, climate change evolving in exponentials. We don't understand it. And teaching humans the ideas, the concept, and then, giving them all the tools in their exams, I think, it's perfectly fine. So I would actually say, I would encourage, I wouldn't call that cheating, I would call this, effective information management. Learn the things that you need to understand, the structures of the disciplines, the ideas, the concept of a discipline, and then, collect the knowledge wherever you can get it from. But, someone who hasn't mastered the architecture of a discipline is not going to be successful with Google unless the test is dumb. If a school test just asks for the reproduction of shallow subject matter content, well, you shouldn't test those things. So in a way, I think the Google question is more a question on the quality of a test than on the nature of examinations. If you have a test that Google can answer, well, don't give it to any human.
Thank you, Andreas. And over to you, Richard, for the closing.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and thank you, Andreas, for those comments on the questions. Bukri, we can't talk about Burkina Faso, can we, without coming to you? That would be very strange. So what were your reflections as somebody embedded in that culture at the moment?
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, everyone. I'm a little bit concerned according to Faso, what we talk about. According to my experience, I'm a medical doctor and also I'm a PhD in health informatics. And I previously occupied a post of director. I was previously director of health information system during 4 years. Before going to USAID, and also currently I'm in Guinea Equatorial. But I think that in my phone, I think the digital environment in Burkina Faso seems favorable from my experience, and I think it will be really possible for I in education to implement that in this country. I'm completely sure, and I think I can, in my site, I can facilitate some connection with some key stakeholders, and maybe probably participating in the following this process. That is my phone, and I think really it can be possible to make this experience in Burkina Faso. That is my thinking. Risha.
That's very positive. Perhaps you would share your connections details in the chat, Bukri, LinkedIn, or something like that. I know we're connected, but others. Andreas, certainly a positive message there from Bukri.
Absolutely. No, I think it's very encouraging.
Yeah. Always great to hear about that potential. Well, we're 2 minutes just on the clock, Andreas, and I'd love to finish with this question. We're approaching the weekend, or you and I are anyway. What would you like folks on this call just to be thinking about over Saturday and the Sunday? What are the 1 or 2 questions that you just think are good for people to be pondering from these conversations, these topics? What would you leave us with? Some thoughts to reflect on.
Find a new horizon. I think a weekend is always a great moment to step back from what we do every day and think about, what is a great frontier for me, and how can I actually find a pathway to that frontier, and how can learning empower and enable me. I think the biggest mistake we can make as humans is to limit our own horizon, and I think we do that too often. And often in education, we are often too many times told what we are not so good at. And in a way, I think take the weekend to think forward. Where do I what is important to me, and how can I build my pathway to that future? And I think we should all have that belief that everybody can learn.
I love that. My first job was with the BBC, and I got that job right after a career counsellor at my university told me not to bother approaching the BBC because it was so unlikely I would get a job with them. I don't know if that was a personal comment or
yeah, but it's a good example.
And there's many, many more of those around. Andres, we're truly honored that you would spend some time with us. I commented at the start, not only on the work that you do and the importance of it, but the way that you carry yourself and deliver these messages with such kindness and inclusivity, positivity and thoughtfulness. We are blessed to have you in this world in the role that you're in, and at your humble service if, if we can ever support you in any way. And I'm sure I might follow up with you in due
Thanks so
course.
much, Richard. Really a
Thank
pleasure.
you. We'll speak again, hopefully.
I hope so too.
All the best for now. Picture